back with you once again, and I wanted to take some time today to do a bit of a post-mortem, if you will, on the Donald Trump presidential campaign and his aspirations for the presidency that now have ended. And I know a lot of you are hearing me say that and saying, hey, Donald Trump, isn't he old news? I mean, isn't that yesterday? In terms of the way the media generally goes about things, yes. It is certainly not the news story of the day. It's certainly not what anybody's talking about now. All of that has kind of run its course. But, you know, there's one thing that I've always criticized the media for, and not just the left-leaning mainstream media, but even the right-leaning new media. Both of those entities, both of those groups of people have a real weakness, in my opinion, in that once a story has run its course, once it's finished up, they don't often take the time to put those finished up stories, those ended stories, into perspective. They don't take that time to say, okay, this story has now run its course. What have we learned from it? What can we take from it? That doesn't often happen with any media outlet, left, right, wherever. So I thought it would be worthwhile today to look at the Trump candidacy, such as it was, and say, hey, is there anything we can learn from this now that it's done? More importantly, is there anything the Republican Party can take from this and learn from this? And so that's how I wanted to kind of look at the Trump candidacy now that we know it's finished. It kind of ended with a whimper instead of a bang. So it ended up not coming to fruition, and he ended up going back to his TV show, and you know, that's that. So with the Trump campaign having ended, is there anything the GOP can learn? Well, considering that at one point, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, before the whole birth certificate thing really finished up, when he was asking for the birth certificate but before Obama produced it, at that point, Trump was actually starting to gather some pretty good numbers. He was starting to move up in the polls. He was starting to actually get a bit of support behind it. A lot of conservatives, a lot of independent voters who had not committed to a candidate before were starting to say, you know, I'm kind of liking this idea about Donald Trump. So clearly something he was doing was resonating with at least a percentage of the American population. And when you look at the fact that most of the mainstream Republican candidates out there right now are having difficulty getting that kind of buzz going, they're having difficulty getting people to say, you know, I think I'm really behind that guy, Trump was able to do it. So I think in that respect, there's something that perhaps the GOP can learn from it. Obviously, he was successful to some extent in capturing the imagination of a portion of the American people. The Republican Party, at least the mainstream candidates, are having some trouble with that. Maybe there's something they could learn. So if we acknowledge that Trump was able to get a bit of a buzz going, he was able to get some attention, he was able to get some people, some Tea Partiers even, to say, hey, I'm really interested in what he's saying. How did he do that? Now, if you recall, I personally was never sold on Donald Trump. You can look at my videos that I posted a few weeks back during the height of the Trump, the Trump pursuit of the presidency, and you'll see that I had my doubts about it. But I can tell you this much, that among the other Tea Partiers I talked to at that time, among a lot of the other conservatives and Republicans I talked to at that time, I was in the minority. I was one of the few that was raising those questions. There are a lot of other people that said, I kind of like where this guy's coming from. So what was it about Donald Trump at his height that was so appealing? Interesting question. Was it the birther thing? Well, I doubt it, because while Trump did spend a lot of time talking about birth certificates and that kind of thing, I got to be honest with you, for the last 2 years, since Obama's been in office, you know, I've been around a lot of Tea Partiers, I've been around a lot of conservatives, and I've been around a lot of independent voters who are not pleased with Obama, and to be brutally honest with you, I really didn't hear a whole lot about the whole birther thing from those people during that last 2 years. Now, don't get me wrong, the media's been all over the place, and they've been trying to say that that's one of the big tenets of the Tea Party, the conservative movement. It really hasn't been. I really can't say that over the last 2 years I've heard very many people talk seriously about the birth certificate as a major issue. I would go so far as to say that during the 2-week run-up to Obama producing the birth certificate, during that 2 weeks, I heard more about the birth certificate issue from conservatives than I had for the 2 years leading up to it. So Trump had gotten some publicity on it. He'd gotten some people to start thinking about it. But I don't think that was a huge issue from the outset. In fact, I told someone a few weeks back that to most of us conservatives, it seems like the whole birth certificate thing, the birther thing, was kind of a punchline more than anything else. It was kind of a joke, you know? I mean, it's like we'd be sitting around talking to each other, talking about, you know, Obama screwing up health care or screwing up any number of other things. And we get so exasperated at the end of the conversation, one person would say to the other one, he probably wasn't even born here anyway. It was a joke more than it was anything else. So I can't believe, knowing that the birther thing never really had a huge amount of impact in the conservative movement, I can't imagine that that was the reason that Donald Trump took off in the popularity. I seriously don't think that was it. So if it wasn't the birther thing, if it wasn't the birth certificate thing, one of the primary issues that Trump put his face in front of, then what was it? In my estimation, a lot of the appeal of Donald Trump, and again, acknowledging that I was never sold on, a lot of the appeal of Donald Trump came from the fact that when he would get in front of a microphone and he would speak, that you got the impression that his comments were not run through a focus group, that his comments were not the politically correct answer, that his comments were not meant to appeal to a wide range of voters. You got the feeling, whether this was manipulated or not, you got the feeling and you got the impression that Donald Trump was saying what he believed come hell or high water. You got the impression that whatever Donald Trump said was what he believed, and he really didn't care if you disagreed with him. Now, was that true? Was that not true? I don't know. Was Trump playing this like a fiddle? Maybe he was. I don't know. But the bottom line, in my estimation, is that there was a certain level of appeal into someone being the anti-politician. And Trump was certainly that when he was in the race. That he was daring to ask the questions nobody else would ask. He was daring to go after the birther thing. And a lot of people I know that, including myself, that were not dyed-in-the-wool birthers, that really didn't care about the birth certificate deal, at least had a certain amount of respect for Trump for at least asking the question, since we knew a lot of people had the question and we knew that evidently it was important to Donald. So if it's important to you, at least go out there and ask the question and don't worry about what people are going to think about it. Trump did that. You got the feeling that Trump was kind of a take-no-shit candidate. That he was going to say what he believed, he was going to ask the questions he wanted to ask, and to hell with the consequences. You know what? There's something pretty appealing in that. I think that's what a lot of conservatives and a lot of independents are looking for out of the next presidential candidate and the next president. I think most of us are sick of seeing the typical Washington politician who tries to be everything to everyone. Trump didn't do that. He didn't follow that type of mentality. And whether it was manipulated on his part or not, which I don't know and will probably never know, it must be said that there was some level of appeal to that. So, understanding that a good amount of the Donald Trump appeal was the fact that he would say whatever he thought, at least as far as we knew, that he would take no shit off of anybody, and that he would ask any question that he thought needed to be asked or raise any concern that he thought needed to be raised, regardless of what the polls would tell you would play and wouldn't play. Since that was so much of the appeal, what can the Republican Party learn from that? Well, I think they can learn quite a lot. I think they can learn that the American public is ready for a candidate to be themselves instead of trying to be everything to everybody. That the American public are sick of the focus group candidates. That we're sick of the candidates who are trying to appeal to everybody, and so they try to give you an answer that appeals to you, but phrase it in such a way that it doesn't piss everybody else off. We don't want that anymore, regardless of party. We don't want Mr. Everything to everybody. Unfortunately, the Republican Party, and when I say Republican Party, I'm talking about the leadership, the people in charge of it, they haven't figured this out yet. Kind of stunning to me. I would have thought they would have figured that out after John McCain, but they haven't. They're still trying to push these guys and promote these guys like a Tim Pawlenty or a Newt Gingrich or a Mitch Daniels while he was still in the race, or even a Mitt Romney to the extent that they pushed him. they still are getting behind these guys, and even the conservative media are getting behind these guys that are in that same old GOP mold, that are going to try to give the wink and the nudge to the conservatives while still trying to appeal to the moderates. And a lot of us are kind of sick of that. They're still using what I call a pipeline. You know, it seemed like for the last 20 or 30 years that when it came time for a presidential election, the Republican Party would kind of look in their pipeline and see who'd been with them the longest, whose turn it was to run, and then take that person, try to make him appeal to everybody across the board, try to make him sound like a moderate, and still give a few bones over here to the conservatives, and try and get them elected. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But that's basically where John McCain came from. That's where Bob Dole came from. It's sort of where George W. Bush came from. It's where George H.W. Bush came from. The idea that, okay, you've been a good soldier, you've served us for 20 or 30 years, be it at the state level or in Congress or wherever it was, so now it's your turn. And we're going to take you and put our machine behind you and make you appealing enough to the populace that they'll vote for you. That's been the GOP mindset for the last 20 or 30 years. But I think what the Republican Party is missing is that mindset, that mindset that we're going to take the guy whose turn it is and just plug him in, that's not enough anymore. That's not going to work anymore. That the GOP base has changed in some ways from what it was. Now, some of you are puzzled when I say that. How have we changed? Well, let me give you a non-political example here. Let me give you something we can all probably relate to. Some of you may know, a lot of you may not, that up until late last year, I was involved in the professional wrestling business. Now, not on a national level. I didn't work for WWE or any of the national companies. You've never seen me on national television. But I did some local things throughout 14, 15 years. And so I have a connection to the wrestling business. And so I think back to the mid-90s in the wrestling business, and there's a guy out there that a lot of you are familiar with, a guy named The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. Big Hollywood star now, but he started out in WWE and really made his name there, did a great job there. Generated a lot of money there, one of the biggest stars ever had. But I think back to when he first broke into the WWE. Here was a guy who, on the face of it, had all the tools. In great shape, had a terrific personality, a great athletic look, and the WWE at that point decided, hey, great, we've got this blue chip athlete here, this guy who has all the tools of being one of our big stars for the next 10 or 20 years. So what they decided to do was promote him and push him. That's the term we use in the wrestling business, push, which means to promote somebody or to market them. We're going to market this guy the same way we've marketed all of our other good guy athletes, our baby faces. We're going to market him the same way we've marketed all the other guys for the last 20 years. So they had him go out and smile and shake people's hands and high-five them and kiss the babies. And they'd set up his matches where he would take a beating for most of the match, and then he'd do the big comeback at the end and finally beat the bad guy. And frankly, that's how the entire wrestling business had worked for 20 or 30 years. That's how you promoted a new guy that you were going to get some time out of. But with The Rock, it didn't work. And when he came out smiling and high-fiving people and kissing babies, the fan base absolutely turned on him. They crapped all over him. To use another term from the wrestling business, it got over like a fart in church. It didn't work. The formula that had worked for 20 or 30 years, when put on this quintessential professional wrestler, fell on its face. And it was only when the WWE realized that and allowed Rock to be, Dwayne Johnson, be a little bit more edgy and talk a little trash and be a little bit of a smart aleck and be a little bit more confrontational. At that point, he struck a nerve and he struck a chord with the buying public, and they tucked to him like ducks to water. And he made a tremendous amount of money for himself, made a tremendous amount of money for the company. Point of this being that it took the WWE a while to realize that their tried and true method of promoting a star was outdated by the mid-90s. That they had to go another direction because their fan base had changed. And I think the GOP is in a very similar situation. The GOP base has changed. You know, when I was growing up, and I grew up, as I might have told you before, in an area that was as Republican could be, as socially conservative could be, as red county could be. I mean, to the point that in most of our local elections, the Democrats didn't even bother running anybody. I grew up in that environment. But I remember back then that as Republican as it was, and as conservative as it was, a lot of the people down there were really just single-issue voters. The only thing they really cared about was abortion. So if you were anti-abortion, if you were pro-life, they would overlook a lot of other things. They wouldn't pay attention to a lot of other things. As long as you could convince them you were pro-life, that was good enough. And you weren't too far off the reservation on anything else, that was good enough. What I'm telling you, and what I'm telling the GOP, is that that was the old generation of Republican voter. The new generation of Republican voter, the new generation of conservative, the new independents that are out there, are much more than single-issue voters. Sure, abortion is a very important topic to most of us, one of the most important topics. But fiscal conservatism is important. The overall direction of our country is important. And quite frankly, we're smart enough to see through it when you try to cleverly market to us. Don't use the tried and true cliches that have worked on previous generations of conservatives. Cut to the chase and speak to us. Tell us what's real. Tell us what's truthful, even if we might not want to hear it. We're ready to have the difficult conversations in this nation now. Maybe previous generations of conservatives and Republicans weren't. We are. So we really don't want these candidates that are the stuffed suits, that are the focus group candidates. I think back to that first presidential debate, the Republican debate that happened a couple weeks ago, and Tim Pawlenty was on. And Pawlenty, of course, has been pushed by the Republican Party, and Fox News pushes him, and that's the guy everybody's talking about. And I heard his answers to his questions, and I agreed with probably 85–90% of what Pawlenty said. I didn't think he did a bad job, but the way he structured his answers was very worrying to me, because so much of it was like, okay, I'm going to answer the question, but I'm going to try and do it in such a way that I don't piss the people off that disagree with me. To hell with that! The conservative base and the independent voter wants confrontation in this election. We don't want a non-confrontational candidate. We've seen 100 years of non-confrontational Republicans, and look where it got us. It got us trillions of dollars in debt. The compromises we made got us social programs that are killing us. We don't want that anymore. We want someone that will have the balls and have the guts to step up there and say, to hell with everybody else, this is what's wrong, now let's try and fix it. And I don't know if a Tim Pawlenty or any of his ilk can do that. And I'll tell you right now, if Mitt Romney gets the nomination, I'll vote third party. No way in hell I'll vote for him. So what is the GOP to do? Their mold of a candidate, their blueprint of a candidate is no longer appealing to the base, and I would argue to the independent voters. The plug a guy in, make sure he looks good in the suit, he doesn't screw up when he's talking mentality that appeal to those moderate voters, I don't think that's going to be enough. So where are the candidates? Because the entire GOP pipeline is that type of person. The entire mainstream Republican hierarchy is that type of person, is the focus group candidate. What is there to do? Well, there's good news. I believe that there are take-no-shit candidates out there. The problem is the GOP establishment, Fox News, etc., is not getting behind them yet. There are Herman Cains out there, and you've heard me talk about Herman Cain many times. I believe he'll tell you what he believes, and will be upfront with you and explain it, and if you don't like it, too bad. That's what I want. There are people like Michelle Bachmann who are more concerned about where our country's going than perhaps winning an election. Perhaps even Sarah Palin could be like that. Maybe an Alan West. Some of these candidates are off the beaten path in terms of the traditional way of selecting candidates, but that's what we want. We don't want the typical Republican. When we look back at the typical Republican of the 90s and the late 80s and the early 2000s, we don't like what we see. So much of this Tea Party movement, so much of this new conservatism is a rebellion against the Republican Party almost as much as it's a rebellion against the Democratic Party. And I'm not sure that the GOP power structure realizes that yet. But if they don't figure it out pretty quickly, it might be too late for them. The GOP needs to abandon the focus group candidates, the old school Republicans, and they need to get with this new variety of Republican. A Republican that will question social programs. A Republican that will be fiscally responsible. A Republican that will tell you what he believes, whether you want to hear it or not. That's what we'll respond to. We want confrontation in this election. We want to confront Barack Obama. We want to confront that mentality in America, that moderate and leftist mentality that has led us to the brink of destruction. We don't want a candidate who's just going to slow the car down. We want a candidate that will slam on the brakes, turn the car around, and go full speed in the other direction. Now, if the Republican Party can understand that, and realize that, and do an about-face and start pushing these candidates like Herman Cain, Michelle Bachmann, Sarah Palin if she runs, if they'll do that, we can give Barack Obama and those who think like him the beating of a lifetime. If the GOP doesn't do that, they're not going to win the election, and moreover, they might just see a split in their party that could be irrevocable. A lot of people have asked me if the Tea Party should go third party. I've always said, up to this point, no. We're better off working through the structure of the Republican Party and turning it around and using that machine for our advantage. But if the Republican Party will not go along with us, then I think we do have to go third party. I don't want to go that route. It will be a much tougher road to hoe. But if the GOP establishment doesn't get with the program, that might be what has to happen. 2012 will be as interesting for that reason as it will be the campaign against Obama. So there's the game plan. The game plan is out there. A new type of politician, a new type of Republican, and a very new Republican Party. I sincerely believe there's a generational shift within this party right now. And I want to know if the old guys in charge of it, the old guys in charge of that party, I wonder if they'll realize it, and I wonder if they'll be smart enough to go along with it. That's it for this week. America's Evil Genius signing off. Godspeed.